Hi, everyone. Welcome to Food Talk Live. I am your host, Danielle Nierenberg. One thing that I know has gotten many of my friends and also myself through the pandemic in a lot of ways is reading cookbooks, whether it's kind of for comfort and solace and just knowing that we'll get to eat good food again that we haven't actually cooked, or for ideas of how to turn, some common recipes into something that is uncommonly good. They have been a true source of comfort and nourishment. And that's why I'm excited to get to chat with the authors of a new cookbook today called Uncommonly Good. I'm excited to introduce Matthew Wexler, who is an actor turned chef turned lifestyle journalist and the co-author of Uncommonly Good. He is a nationally recognized writer and editor. He currently works as the senior editor for Edge Media Network and editor and chief critic of Passport Magazine's culture platform, The Broadway Blog. Matthew also holds a culinary certificate from the International Culinary Center. Matthew is joined by Tish Buss, who also comes from the acting world. She is the founder and owner of Good Commons, a wellness retreat in Vermont, which is now seeing rising demand as more and more people get vaccinated, which is exciting. Tish also runs the Good Farm Community Solar Project and serves as a chair of the Yakima Valley Regional Chamber of Commerce Clean Energy Committee, where she helps educate small businesses on the benefits of solar power. Thank you both so much for joining me, and congratulations on this great book.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're thrilled.
Thank you. I echo that.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about this book. What is it all about?
It is definitely a memoir mixed in with great recipes. So we really want people to know that you're reading a book that if you are not interested in cooking, or cooking is for your spouse, let them be. But it will read just like a regular series of short stories, which tells about the trials and tribulations of starting a small business. Really anywhere, but definitely here. And there were additional challenges because Good Commons is 185 years old, the building itself. So it had a very quirky coming into being on a lot of levels. And, the retreat home industry doesn't have a huge history. So we were not only making up the space and how we wanted to present it, but the industry as a whole did not have a platform for us to model. So we were really creating a model ourselves.
Oh, that's great. Matthew, you were talking before we went live about some of those trials and tribulations that Tish mentioned, that the journey to socially responsible and sustainable cooking and farming is not always a pretty journey, that there are often, some hiccups along the way. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, when we first started, it was sort of this divine ignorance, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. It was funny listening to you recall some of our past in history. I was like, oh yeah, there was a time in our lives when we were actors. I mean, that's how Tish and I met. And, she saw this property in Vermont and really transformed it with her dad. And then when she brought me on and we kind of decided to build it out, like I guess it was in our bones, but we didn't really have the practical knowledge of sort of the next steps. And so we just really started doing it. I guess it was fundamental from the beginning that we were going to source locally. You can't be in Vermont. I always say this when, driving from New York City, where I live, to Vermont, it's like you cross over the border and you roll down the window and all of a sudden you just smell and it's just green and fresh and alive. And that absolutely had to be part of the food story of the place, right? So Tish started to forge relationships with local farmers as we were bringing people up and starting to host our own retreats. It just naturally evolved into agritourism, but there's bumps along the road with that because these are all small businesses. And as we've talked about, there's just not always the infrastructure for that. I remember there was a retreat, Tish, I don't know if you recall this, we wanted to get local vegetables and maybe something happened and we were in her Subaru just driving around like looking for farm stands, and like I specifically wanted zucchini, and we saw this sign on the road and we just like went on this tangent, like nothing is close in rural Vermont. Sure. It's like 45 minutes to get anywhere, and so we just went on this zucchini rant and we found it actually.
Yeah. And I do have a purveyor for local vegetables now, but I meet him at a general store 20 minutes away because it's at the halfway point between both of us. And that's how we do it. And now there is infrastructure for a bit more local meats,
Sure.
but yeah.
Yeah, no, we were talking earlier about how that infrastructure is key, and we've certainly seen that during the pandemic. Infrastructure for meat processing, whether on a big scale or a large scale, was problematic over the last year. So being able to, sort of advocate for that infrastructure, whether it's in a book or, through your retreat and just, the way you're both living your lives, I think is beneficial. Putting this book together, Tish, you mentioned that it's, sort of like a memoir, and those are the kinds of cookbooks that speak to me as a reader the most, the ones where you learn about the people who are actually cooking rather than just learning, although I need those too, just learning sort of the techniques. And writing a book together is not an easy process. I'm sure you both had your own sort of ideas and had to come to terms with them. Were there any points where you were both just sort of on opposite sides of, how you should approach the next chapter?
Wow. I'm not for sure if we were ever on completely separate pages, but Matthew really let me do the memoir part, and he's a great editor. So I really appreciated how he made my writings that I'm not a professional writer like him. So that was a real benefit to us. I think for us, it was more remembering everything that happened. And we both needed each other to pull out the details of all these stories. And then we definitely took some things and messed with them from our families, like the Magic Hat meatballs. That was a really fun thing for us to just collaborate on and take that to a different level. Because the meatballs that I grew up, every church social that I went to had those meatballs in it. Okay. But Matthew and I've worked together for a long time, and we have very different. I am broad scale, so I am a visionary. I am not a detail person, and Matthew is all about the details, and everything has to be in just a certain way. And I'm a Tasmanian devil, which probably makes him crazy.
That's a great description. Does it make you crazy, Matthew?
I think it has at various points, but like crazy in a good way, right? I think, what Tish and I had in common, we met in Chicago doing dinner theater, ironically, and this was years ago. And, we both came from a Midwest. And so when we started to revisit like the narratives of our childhood, I think we sort of saw this commonality. It's interesting because Tish grew up on a farm, and she could speak to what happened there in terms of small farming. I mean, just sort of like the trials and tribulations of her own family, right? But just the kinds of foods that we were exposed to through no fault of our parents or family. It was just an era where it was like freeze it or fryer kind of stuff. And so like thinking about those comfort foods and then trying to reimagine them in a way that can pretty easily draw on natural, locally sourced ingredients. So yeah, things sort of found their way along. I guess when we were looking more on a sort of a recipe level, I was more interested in the stories connected to the food than just like writing an introduction to a recipe that's actually talking about the recipe. We do that a little bit, and there is some really great, very practical food knowledge peppered throughout the book. But I wanted to give it a framework that had context, because when people are at Good Commons and on a retreat and sort of experiencing the food, those narratives and that storytelling, it kind of makes everything taste better.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Once you know the story behind something, either the food itself or a dish that was created, it does make it taste better or different, at least in ways that you wouldn't have experienced before. That's wonderful. So, acting to cooking, I think probably a lot of people think those are very different professions. But from my perspective and my co-founder, Bernie Pollock's perspective, I think there's a lot of synergy between the two in terms of, people who are passionate about the arts are also, passionate about lots of different things, including where their food comes from. And I'm wondering if you can both take us along that journey of sort of maybe trading one art for the other and getting involved in the food and not just the cooking space, but really thinking about that storytelling, thinking about where your food comes from.
Absolutely. I've said to Matthew so much, I'm like, we're still in dinner theater. Because, well, the first night, we still call it opening night. People arrive. And then I do a little spiel about the house and the area. I mean, we're a mile away from the second oldest working cheese factory in the nation. So we definitely incorporate Plymouth artisan cheese into our cooking, as well as, milk is Vermont state drink. So we're very passionate about all dairy products. And Matthew actually has a lot of dairy-filled recipes in the book. And I think that's wonderful. And I think our personalities, if you are making up a recipe and somebody digs your personality, they're probably going to dig your food, because the personality and the flavor, that crosses all sensual boundaries, essentially. I think it incorporates everything.
That's great. Matthew?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like Tish is sort of relentless, and she has this very strong forward momentum that has always sort of fueled her life. And I perhaps have stepped a little more cautiously. When she first asked me to cook at Good Commons, at that point, I hadn't even had culinary training. It was just us having these huge meals up in Washington Heights, a neighborhood in New York where we both lived. And then all of a sudden I was cooking for 20 people in this house. It's all sort of crazy to me. But with time and with reflection, I have absolutely come to understand that creative expression transforms and transcends over time. And what I saw at one point of more of, I just wasn't sure how to define sort of what my skill set was. Looking back, I realized it was all of these layers, like a great dish, really building one on top of another on top of another. And it really is kind of a similar situation with our food systems, right? We're not living in silos. As soon as we understand that it's all interconnected, how we treat the planet, how we treat the earth, our farmers' responsibility to that process, that connectivity to the people who are purchasing it, the accessibility of people to be able to get it, all of those things are equally as connected.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I want to talk about the Good Commons retreat, and you're on your website. It says that it's dedicated to providing an essential resource, a space to create, a space to empower the body and soul, a space to heal and to be fed. And I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit more about this mission, which I really like. I think part of, retreating is really being able to nourish yourself and refuel. And it sounds like that's what you're trying to do.
100% refuel on every kinetic system, the body, the mind, the soul. When you sit around a table with people that you don't know very well, you tend to express yourself and share in a more intimate way, because you're not worried about how you're going to be judged most of the time. And that informs the food. And the mission, I wanted to be broad, because we have retreats where we have ladies come and they do this really artistic weaving in the studio. Rebecca Mazoff teaches them, and she got married there. So she took this amazing private experience from her, and then now has brought all of these lovely women into it. And their cooking experience, or their experience around the table, is different. They spend most of their time talking when they're weaving, and they don't do it around the dinner table. But everything is still about, you come in the door and you leave different. And of course, you have to put whatever you're going to put into it is what you're going to get out of it. But I don't think that you can possibly be unscathed by it in the most beautiful way. And I think that's what people truly need right now. So if your process is, you go into the belly of the home, the studio, and whatever you're trying to get out of it, if it's a creative idea or a cleansing, an empowerment, that's the goal. But if you are not fed well, we've had retreats where they said, the leader said 100% vegan. And after 2 of them, I said, I will never do that. I will always offer half and half in the coffee. I will always offer hard-boiled eggs. because people can't switch their energy source. And then you see this panic come over people's faces because they don't understand that vegan means not half and half in their coffee. They're like, what are you talking about? It's my coffee. I can't have it any different way. So you really have to keep everybody at this baseline of comfortability so that they can do the work that they came here to do.
That's really important. Thanks for sharing that. I hadn't thought about that. Food is obviously for me, food is such an essential part of my life. But when you travel, it is, if you're trying to as you said, cleanse or refuel or do different things, you also need to have that comfort and that hospitality that is so important.
Tish, that's just reminding me, we had a guest who had come a couple times over the course of a couple different retreats, and she actually brought her own hard-boiled eggs that she had gotten, they were like cryovac or something. And I used to bring my dog up, Wilbur. He was like our house dog when Tish was first renovating the property, and he's since passed, but he was a beloved, he was always food motivated and a beloved energy around the house. And on one of those retreats, he had gotten into her purse and was munching away at her hard-boiled eggs. So maybe, Tish, that's another reason why you always have hard-boiled eggs.
Yes, but also I have to say that we do not do traditional yoga food. So people come and they think it's going to be 100% vegetarian and, perfectly, unbelievably healthy. And everything is very healthy, but it is food. Like, we all want to eat. And if you do an 1.5 to 2 hour yoga class, and then you go for a hike, and then you're going to do an afternoon class, and then you might do a restorative at night, you're going to be burning calories. You need some serious food. So we don't say we do yoga food. We just say we do good food.
That's great. That's wonderful. Yeah. Comfort food and good food are much needed, especially right now as we come out the other side of this pandemic, I think in so many ways. Matthew, I want to talk about your background a little bit. So, acting and then, cooking and now, and I'm sure you were doing all of these kind of things simultaneously, but writing as a culinary travel expert, how does that influence the work that you do with Tish?
I think it's made it better, actually. When I started working with Tish up in Vermont, I was actually at the time working at Food Bank for New York City, which is one of the largest hunger relief organizations in the country. And I think that in and of itself sort of informed how we were thinking about food. And then over the years, it's all just sort of layered upon itself. I had never really thought about being a writer professionally, to be honest. And it was only after the very beginning, after maybe the first year or so, where I said to Tish, I'm like, we need to get journalists up here to cover. We need marketing, we need publicity. People need to see what we're doing. And so I started to do that. And then I thought, ooh, that looks interesting. I want to do that. So I started blogging a little bit and doing some stuff pro bono. And very organically, it just evolved into my work. It just became a full-time thing. And I quit my job and I started freelancing, and then eventually joined Edge Media, where I'm at now full-time, as an editor. I think it took us a long time to bring the book to fruition, but I will say it would not be the book that it is had it not taken that long, because the writing got better. I was traveling more internationally and bringing some of those flavors and ideas and energy to the food, which in turn sort of affected and informed the storytelling.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And Tish, I mean, seeing, sort of the changes in Matthew's life as he was doing all these different things, I'm sure that came across, to you and changed your work as well.
100%. And honestly, I'm the main cook now. And most of what I learned comes from Matthew. I so much. I mean, my parents own a bar and restaurant in rural Illinois, but we're far stretched from hot beef sandwiches and, mashed potatoes and gravy and that kind of thing on the regular. So I definitely learned so many techniques from Matthew over the years. And I still do a lot, I cook a lot of his dishes. And of course it's fun to do stuff from the cookbook too, because it brings me back to Matthew doing it. My stuff never looks quite as perfect as Matthew's, but everybody still eats it.
That's great. So going back to the book itself, what kinds of recipes can folks expect to see?
I can take that on. I think, the book is, as Tish mentioned, reads sort of like a memoir in terms of the narrative. So it's structured with recipes that kind of reflect our Midwestern past. There's comfort food recipes. When I first started cooking and we first started enjoying food together, this was not at Good Commons, but once again up in Washington Heights when we were just eating and drinking in my apartment. I had been working at Mesa Grill, Bobby Flay's flagship restaurant in New York City, and very much sort of into the restaurant scene in New York. So I was really influenced by Southwestern cuisine. And prior to that, when I lived in Chicago, I worked at a small independently owned Southwestern restaurant. So there's a whole chapter on that. And then the story kind of migrates to international recipes. We've done a lot of retreats at Good Commons where we take people out sort of for, I don't want to say agritourism because it sounds so stuffy in a way, but I guess it is. I mean, we are experiencing the land and the purveyors and everything that
field trips
space. Yeah. And then of course there's brunch because, every weekend must come to an end and people love brunch. So we have a whole chapter on brunch.
That's great. Do you have a favorite recipe, Matthew, in the book?
I guess it depends on my mood. I should have been prepared for that because people always ask. Yeah, I love, there's a recipe for sort of like a beef bourguignon shepherd's pie, which is kind of the clashing of the classical French technique that I had in school, which I both loved and infuriated me at the same time. Like I remember learning how to make a niçoise salad and every single ingredient had a separate bowl. I'm like, this is crazy. And it's certainly not going to work at Good Commons because we're doing all the dishes, right? Like we just need to cut that out right away. But there is that fundamental technique kind of informs everything. And so the shepherd's pie is using humble ingredients like this local ground beef that I talked about. We had gotten a Scottish Highlander and had it butchered for us. I mean, I don't know, it felt like hundreds of pounds of ground beef because we didn't know the cuts were so strange. The way that animal is built is very different than the kind of meat that you get shrink wrapped at a grocery store. So we had a ton of ground beef, but in using that in a recipe that sort of has this classic French flair with a good glug of red wine, you can't go wrong.
Nice. That sounds great. Tish, what's your favorite?
The Bad Day brownies. I make the Bad Day brownies all the time. They're amazing. Everybody loves them. I tweak the recipe just a little bit differently because I like my brownies to not have any crunch in them. So I melt all the chocolate. I melt all the chocolate. Yeah. Okay. Just into the same pot, which also makes it faster and easier, I think. Because, we put out 100 and something meals over a weekend, and it's usually 2 people doing the cleanup and the prep and everything. So efficiency is key. And so that's the other thing. I don't think any of these recipes take forever and ever and ever. So that's also good. And the one thing about the grass-fed beef is that it is a leaner meat. So the fact that we did put it into burger is actually really good. It's one of the better ways to eat the meat. Otherwise, you got to tenderize it a lot. Absolutely. So you don't get that amazing marbleization that you get with corn-fed beef, which I got to say I still like a lot.
You can have both. No one's telling you not to. I think, it's so interesting to hear from people who write a cookbook, what most sort of speaks to them. And, I wonder what you want the readers to get out of this. So it's a memoir, it's a practical guide. It shows, again, those triumphs and, successes that you've had, but also the challenges you faced. What do you want readers to most come away with?
Don't be afraid of anything. Don't be afraid of the recipe. Don't be afraid to fail. Just try it. Just get off the fence post. Stop looking at it and thinking it's inaccessible to you. Get in, dig in, and enjoy. Okay. And if you fail, laugh at it.
Absolutely. Matthew?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we're coming out of such a challenging and overwhelming and draining year, and it's not over yet. We don't know what the future looks like. If we can just try to find the smallest bit of lightness in our life and sort of shed some of those burdens that we just tend to carry with us, The book has great recipes and has fun stories, but as Tesha said, I think it's the journey and the process is what we were so passionate about in writing it, and what we want to convey to people, both through the book itself and through people who are coming to have that experience at Good Commons.
That's great. That's wonderful. And where can folks find the book?
Go to Amazon. You can find it online, amazon.com. You can just look at the title, Uncommonly Good. You can also go to the website for Good Commons, goodcommons.com, and there's a little banner at the top. Or if you want to read more of my writing, you can check out wexlerwrites.com, and there's a big pop-up with a picture of the book, and you can click on it there.
Fantastic. That's great. So final question. We've been talking about how the last year and a half has really changed us all. And you know, Matthew, you said we don't know what's coming, but I think, you know, knowing that that we could get through this past year, and as Tish said, you know, sort of, you know, overcoming some of these predicaments that have, you know, not just the pandemic, but being able to laugh and enjoy and taste good food. These are all good lessons, but I'm wondering what has kept you both nourished, what has fed your soul and your lives during the last year. Is it a Netflix series, a podcast, you know, your dogs, whatever it is there one thing in particular that's really kept you going?
Well, I started a new business. I know that sounds crazy, but I have a 6-year-old, and she lost her mind being away from other friends during the pandemic and started having all sorts of defiant behavior issues and couldn't get through homework. I eventually just gave up. So I created a remote learning center. So when kids, they only went to school 2 days, and then they would come to the center 3 days a week. And I got to say that really kept me going. And now I cook with the kids. On break week, we made, you know, homemade pizza crusts, and we did sugar cookies and made homemade icing. And we're making little gelatin balls to put on top of the ice cream for our, you know, party on Friday. Introducing kids to food. There are some kids that have never leveled a teaspoon, and they're 12. And then other kids are 6, and they're like, I bake with my mom all the time. It's amazing. And science is such we really should integrate more food into science class, because I think it really helps to get kids interested in science a lot.
Absolutely. It's such a great idea. Matthew, what's kept you nourished and fed during this, you know, really chaotic year?
Yeah, believe it or not, I started graduate school, like on top of everything else. It's funny that Tish started a business, and I just wanted, so I started studies in English education, and I've been taking a class in young adult multicultural literature. The specifics of that to me aren't as important as the message of, you know, as soon as we allow hubris to outweigh humility, we're in trouble, right? So for me, I always want to feel like I'm learning. I always want to feel like I'm challenging myself. I always want to feel like I don't know it all.
Sure.
And that gives me just enough of a lift to keep going ahead.
That's wonderful. That's really both great lessons. And I feel very bad about myself. You're both overachievers. I didn't do half as much as you've done during the pandemic, but that's okay. I'll get over it. Please go to goodcommons.com if you want to buy the book, or as Matthew said, you can buy it at your local bookstore or a corporation who I won't name, but you can go to their website. You know where it is. I want to thank you both so much. This has been really such a wonderful way to have to spend an afternoon with you both and learning more about where you come from and how you cook and write and sort of live in the world. I really appreciate it. I hope folks will join me next week on May 19th at 9 a.m. Eastern time, when I'll be talking about agroecological practices around the world with some of the UN Food Systems Summit's champions. Thank you both, Tish and Matthew. It's been wonderful to meet you.
Thank you so much. Great to meet you too.